Hey guys, and welcome back to the Ground Up Show. I'm your host, Matt Diavella. This is a podcast about how to create something meaningful from nothing. And our guest today is Spence, and he's got a really interesting career trajectory. He started out as a professional wrestler, turned dating coach, turned performance strategist. He's a really interesting character, and we go through a lot of really great actionable steps to help you if you're feeling stuck. That conversation in a moment. But first, if you like this podcast and you liked Minimalism, a documentary about the important things, I've got something for you. I recently conducted interviews with the producers of Minimalism to give a detailed look at how we made the film from nothing. Those interviews with Josh and Ryan from theminimalist.com and our media company, Spire, are yours for free if you leave a review for the Ground Up Show on iTunes. Reviews help to get the word out for the show and help us to continue to do what we do so well here, what I like to think we do so well here. To get immediate access to these interviews, take a screenshot of your review and send it to hello@mattdiavella.com. And now, this is Spence, episode 25 of the Ground Up Show. Spence.
Yo, homie.
Welcome to the show.
I appreciate you having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. This was so last second.
Yep.
You literally texted me this morning, and you're like, you want to grab a drink? And I said, you want to come on my podcast? And that's where we are right now. I'm glad that we could make this work.
Me too, man. I did not see this coming when I woke up this morning in Austin, Texas. I found out that you moved to LA when I landed in a plane in LA, which was cool, and I'm very happy that we're here now.
I tried to get you on the podcast in New York when I was still doing it out there, but I feel like whenever you're traveling, you're somewhere for a day or two, and it's just very tight to fit into the schedule, especially last second. So this is going to be good because you have a very interesting life. You were a professional wrestler, turned dating coach, turned Spartan Plan creator. There's a lot that I want to unpack and talk about. But before we do get into kind of your journey and where you got started out, tell me and the audience a little bit about your current work and what you do, both the 9-to-5 work that you do as well as the passion projects.
I'm going to sound like a Joe Rogan fanboy here, but I like to base what I do off of his career model, which I call sort of a hybrid career. A lot of people out there in the interwebs are big on entrepreneurship, do that and nothing else. And that's fine, right? That helps people make some incredible things. I'm into building my own side projects, but I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with working for people if you're doing something that lights you on fire. So my day job, I run the student outcomes department for a coding program called Hack Reactor. And that student outcomes is just a fancy word for the career services department. So I manage a team of 11 career coaches that we help at any given time. We're coaching about 400 software engineers to help guide them into a career. And these are folks who are very new to the industry, so they're scared. And they need some advice on how to get to that next level. And that's what my team and I do. So I feel like it would be foolish of me to say, I got to get out of this day job, man.
Right.
It's so cool. I get to help people.
Isn't that like that? That's what people typically think.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with millennials and younger people, and even part of the minimalist movement and people that talk about it, a lot of it can be, it can sound anti-9-to-5, anti-job, which is like everybody needs a job. Everybody needs to make a living. And sometimes they're deeply fulfilling jobs.
Exactly. And everyone's on a different part of their journey. So you might not be in a job that is as exciting as what I get to do. I understand. I've had jobs that were horrible. But the idea was to always have a plan for how I was going to get to the next spot in my life, continue to grow. And so, it sounds cheesy, but you have to pay your dues sometimes. Some people have more opportunities than others. So
you do that as your main 9-to-5. And then what are some of, at least the passion projects that you're working on right now?
Yes. So you mentioned Spartan Plan. So I have a background in coaching in a number of different realms, career coaching, dating advice, but also fitness coaching. And Spartan Plan, it's going to sort of be a combination of all of those things. I suspect the part where people will register most is fitness, just because it's called Spartan Plan. But the idea behind Spartan Plan is more based on simplicity of the methods that I employ. So you don't need an incredibly fancy plan to become successful in a given thing, at least not normally. You're likely familiar with Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule, the 20% of stuff you do that gets you 80% of the results. So I like to break complicated things down and make them simple. Not necessarily easy, but simple. And that is probably a big part of why you and I ever met, through the Minimalists. I also work with them on their mentorship page. That's where I get a lot of my one-on-one clients, which is very helpful for sort of building out larger systems to help bigger groups of people.
Yeah, it's funny. The first time I met you, it was at a point in my life where I was pushing myself out of my comfort zone and doing something that was terrifying, because I was putting money and paid work and everything I'd been working towards on the side to work on this documentary, Minimalism. And one of the first nights we stayed at your place, you kind of have instant connection with people where I'm like, oh, this is a cool dude. I feel like we're going to get along.
I knew right away when we hugged. I was like, that's a good hug.
Whenever I hang out with Josh and Ryan, because they hug everybody, I feel like I too have to start hugging people, but it's always kind of weird because I'm holding a camera usually.
You don't want to be the asshole that doesn't hug.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to shake your hand here. Yeah, it can be, you just have to go with the flow, and it works out most of the time. But yeah, let's go back to, I guess, where do you want to start? Where does your story start?
Where does it start? That's a big question. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And I guess really it starts, the part that gets interesting and juicy with the dating stuff. I was married at a young age, got married at 23 to my high school sweetheart, the only adult relationship I'd ever had. And like 3 days after my stepmom's funeral, my ex-wife asked for a divorce. And as you might imagine, it was pretty painful for me to deal with really two massive losses at the same time. And I was supposed to go to couples counseling with my ex, but she didn't show up, so it just turned into me counseling. The counselor, I asked, hey, look, I'm really depressed right now. I don't think it's a chemical sort of imbalance. I understand that there are some massive blows that I've taken in the past few weeks. And I'm curious, what advice do you have for me to try to get through this as soon as possible? And she said, well, the three things that stand out to me would be make sure that you're exercising. And now at the time I was a professional wrestler. So
Did she look at you?
Like, it was my job to exercise. I was probably 50 pounds heavier with just muscle.
Yeah.
And she's like, eat right. I'm like, check.
Yeah.
And then she says, and when you're ready, go on dates. Nothing serious. You don't go sleep around or anything like that. But you should see that other people are interested in getting to know you and that your life can go on after this relationship. And I thought to myself, well, I don't even know how to do that. I met my ex-wife when I was 17, 24 at the time that she's asking for the divorce. So I'm kind of up a creek without a paddle. And I wish that I could say that I found the pickup artist community where everyone read The Game and all these other books.
Yeah, that's how I found it.
I mean, I ultimately read that stuff, but I didn't know it was out there, and I was sort of an internet novice. So I just grabbed a pen and paper and went to bars and started taking notes on stuff that I was seeing. And
that is the dorkiest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. It was brutal. And then occasionally people would ask me what I was doing, and that made it even worse.
Yeah, it's super creepy.
I don't like
and then
lying.
you get kicked out of the bar.
I got kicked out of a few bars, but not for that.
Not that, okay.
Anyway, I started learning, and before long, someone, by happenstance, this guy I went to high school with, who will remain nameless, saw what I was doing, recognized me from the wrestling world, and was like, you're trying to learn to talk to women, aren't you? I was like, yeah, I am. And And I'm talking to him a little while, and I go, how did you know? And he goes, well, I'm here teaching someone to talk to women. And we ended up developing a relationship. He sort of took me under his wing, like an apprentice. And I was in the process of moving back to my hometown in Cleveland. I was living in Georgia. And he let me crash with him for like 3 months. Wow. And just work on that, which I don't recommend. Don't do that.
Bad idea.
Yeah, but it was sort of the thing that made it possible for me to offer that skill set to other people, because I was sort of in a very unhealthy way obsessed with it for a while.
What was so bad about it? Was it the living with this guy for 3 months and just working on nothing but online dating?
Yeah. So it was, the nothing but isn't necessarily what was bad, because I love deep diving into things. In fact, I'm a big believer in the idea that you should find just a few things that really set you on fire and forget everything else and do those few things, make them your superpower. So it wasn't so much that, but it was the fact that I was using that to sort of nurse the pain of the loss of my stepmother and my wife. And I've never been into drinking or doing drugs or anything like that, but this became my vice. And so whenever I was feeling alone or insecure or whatever the case may be, I would try to get someone to show me affection. And that's not healthy. That's not the grounds for a strong relationship.
So walk me through that journey, that 3 month plus journey of becoming would you call yourself a pickup artist?
Oh,
at
God.
the time?
It's such a bad word. No, yeah. I guess we could just say dating coach, and now it would be more like a behavior modification specialist. Mm-hmm. It started with him teaching me to approach people, and this is, I think, particularly useful for anyone listening, regardless of their relationship status. What I've learned is that people are afraid of taking that first step. So in the dating world, it would be approaching someone, starting the conversation. But maybe in your career, it's going to this networking event, or for you, taking that dive and making the documentary that you feel passionate about. And people like to think about all the what ifs. What if this happens? What if I approach this woman and she throws her hot coffee in my face? Or what if I make this documentary and it fails and I end up homeless on the street? We like to think up every possible what if scenario because, one, it gives us a sense of certainty, and people like to act when they feel certain. But two, and this is the bigger one, it makes us feel like we're being productive when we're not being productive. Mm-hmm. We're not actually moving forward. And I needed to learn that lesson sort of the hard way. So he would set requirements on how many people I had to approach per day. It was more, hey man, you have to go start a conversation with 15 people today. And if you don't get to sleep on my couch.
That's a big reward to hold over somebody's head.
Yeah, or a punishment, right?
Yeah.
I tend to respond better to the stick than the carrot.
Gotcha.
And most people do. Once the pain of inaction becomes greater than the pain or potential pain of action, that's where people start to move. And so for me, that helped get me moving. By no means was I a Casanova overnight. And my wife will tell you that I'm still not.
Yeah.
But it helped me get out of my shell. When I help people with career advice, the easiest part of the process is to apply for the job. And yet it's the part people don't do the most. Like they're afraid to apply because they think, well, what if this? What if they find me out? That's the big one. Career, dating, anything. What if they find out that I'm faking it? Mm-hmm. And you're probably not faking it, is the funny thing. I don't think you were, but I wouldn't doubt that most successful people still have that same feeling. They just don't let it affect their action.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome. And this is something that I talk about a lot on the podcast. I think a lot of it, the core comes down to doubt. And we just have so much doubt. And I continue to have so much doubt about any big or new or scary project that I work on. And I'm constantly curious as how people get through doubt. So how did you, in those let's just say specifically those moments there where you're failing miserably and you probably have so much doubt. What is it that got you through those early mistakes?
This is going to sound cheesy as hell, but around that time, I was also deeply studying Zen Buddhism. I'm not religious. I wasn't then either. But I thought it would be a nice framework by which to lead my life. And it helped me in a number of ways. But one of the big ways was it made me very conscious of the fact that no matter what happens, I'm going to fucking die.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how safe I play it. What am I trying to avoid when I avoid the risk? Oh, well, I could end up homeless on the street. Oh, okay, why does that worry you? Well, people won't like me. Oh, okay, why does that worry you? And ultimately, it comes down to this fear of self-annihilation. But once you accept that that's going to happen no matter what, then like I have this sort of it's not a mantra, but I like to think to myself, it's okay because you're going to die, so don't worry. Like most people worry they're going to die. I go, don't worry. You will die.
Gonna die. In a lot of ways, that's very comforting. It reminds me of this book. I believe it's called No Death, No Fear by Thich Nhat Hanh. And I just probably screwed up every part of his name as well as the book. But it's that similar sentiment that once you can get over death, you can get over fear and you can really do anything from there. You're into the self-development stuff like I am. What's the corniest thing that you've ever done? Like you talk about mantras, and I've certainly done that where you recite things into the mirror. Like what's the corniest shit you've done?
Oh man, I've done that for sure. I will tell you a thing I still do that is incredibly corny. And I tell all of my clients and all of my students to do it. I call it a daily reprogramming. So I don't necessarily sit on a cushion and meditate the way I did in years past. But I feel like with all the media that's out there, we're plugged into the internet all the time. There's all these conflicting messages that are coming into our minds. And it's easy to get distracted and not stay on a particular path that you have chosen. So what I do is I like to have a daily reprogramming. I wrote out a manifesto about all the things that are important to me and all of the things I need to ignore that will inevitably happen throughout my day. And I read that out loud on my iPhone, and then I set it up to be my alarm at random times throughout the day.
That's really neat. I like that.
And it's so cheesy, but whenever I hear it, I get fired up, and I don't even have to let it play all the way. Like today, I was in the middle of a business meeting, and it started playing, and it starts off with, "You are crew Spence." And I'm like, oh, God.
Just in case you forget. It's like Memento, but for self-development.
Yeah.
That's a really clever way to keep yourself on track, because I just talked about this in my last podcast, is how do you stay on track? And oftentimes I try to set habits like meditation or waking up early, and then I fall off track. And then I think that is part of the journey, and nobody's perfect, and there will be times when we fall out of our workout routines, but it's like, how do you pull yourself back into it, which is so important. With the dating coaching, I asked you for advice early on. This was probably a couple years ago, before I met my current girlfriend, Natalie. I wanted a little bit of advice and guidance because I was starting to get nervous after coming out of a relationship for maybe a 2-year relationship. I was nervous about putting myself back out there, and I didn't know what was the first step I should take, and I had forgotten everything I had learned about dating. And then I remember you telling me just some crazy shit, like just ask people, like go run up to a stranger and tell them that you need to take a shit, and that you need the closest bathroom, and if they could direct you to it, that would be great.
I forget the technical term for that, but we'll call it fear chasing. And I had just started experimenting with that for people who had anxiety about starting conversations with strangers. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about. They had all these what ifs, and they thought of all the horrible things that could happen. And so what I tried to do was to manufacture those horrible things, way worse than the real world would ever create. And then this way they could sit in that feeling and experience it. And my thought was, this is a cheesy quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, do the thing that you fear, and the death of fear is certain. And so if you're afraid of them finding you out, or if you're afraid of being shamed publicly, chase that fear, experience it, and stay in it. Mm-hmm. So the telling them that you have diarrhea and holding your asshole and running up to them, or just walking up and saying embarrassing things about yourself to people, is that healthy? I don't know.
I'm not a psychologist.
I don't even pretend to look at me. Come on.
Yeah.
But it tends to be funny for the people you're talking to. It's like I would never have someone say something that offends the person you're approaching. Yeah. It's never about belittling anyone else. It's if you can make a joke about yourself, and they know you're joking usually. They have a good time about it, and then you start to get into a state of mind where failure is no longer something you're afraid of. Does it last forever? Fuck no. Mm-hmm. But if you're thinking, maybe it's not dating. Maybe you're about to go to this networking thing for your job, and you're feeling really nervous. Have some weird conversations with strangers. Talk about some weird shit that you don't talk about with anybody, and you're going to have a much easier time talking about mundane work type stuff. In fact, you'll probably be the life of the party because you'll be talking about a bunch of other weird stuff that people don't dare speak of.
There came a point where I just got fed up with boring conversation, and I'd rather just say something that might be a little bit offensive, that might cross the line, because it's going to probably lead to an interesting conversation. And if you get offended by it, then you're probably not the kind of person that I'd want to talk to anyway. That advice really helped me out a lot. And I remember even before I met my ex, and when I just started to get back into dating, it was that fear and anxiety that was in a lot of ways crippling. I remember you said you had something very similar when you, like, your first approach that you ever had.
Oh, man. Yeah. Let's see if I can remember this correctly. I remember the outcome for sure. I was supposed to say something silly to these women. That was what my mentor had told me to say. He said, I want you to go up to them and you start a conversation however you want, but at some point you need to mention to them that you just fucking love Fruity Pebbles, and you would love nothing more than to sit in a bathtub full of Fruity Pebbles and eat Fruity Pebbles with them. And so I do love Fruity Pebbles.
Who doesn't?
But I go, and I'm nervous about approaching them, so I'm just kind of like not even willing to do it. And the guy who's my mentor is 285 pounds, 6'5", semi-pro MMA fighter, to put in perspective. Picks me up, straight arm, and walks me over to them because I'm unwilling to go do this. Mm-hmm. I'm unwilling to chase the fear. He plops me down in front of them. He says, this is my friend Crew. He wants to talk to you. And he says, go on, Crew. And to their credit, these women are like, oh, hi, Crew. And they're waiting for a pleasant conversation. And I start crying. Like, not like water in my eyes, like tears running down my face. And I kind of like whimper out what he said to say because I knew I wouldn't have a place to sleep that night unless I did. But it was interesting because then I wanted to leave, right? I felt ashamed. And not only did he physically not let me leave because he wanted me to sit in the fear and experience the thing that I was afraid of, but the women didn't want me to leave. And not because they were like, oh yeah, I want to jump this guy's bones. Yeah. It wasn't that. It was compassion. They were like, oh, something's wrong. Like, this guy seems like a normal person. He's crying about Fruity Pebbles. That's not normal. But then we started having a real conversation about where I was in my life. They started opening up about where they were in their lives. It ended that night. It was actually a very pleasant conversation in the end. But, I was very thankful for that fear chasing that he forced me into. And I would start to do more things like that, not with the cheesy Fruity Pebble stuff, but, whenever I found myself in something uncomfortable, I would just sit in it. I did it actually as a little kid. I used to be afraid that when my dad, he likes beer, and I think a lot of kids dealt with this where their dad would be like, go get me a beer. Well, my dad kept the beer in the fridge that was in the basement, and I was always afraid that aliens were going to get me.
Of course.
And I remember this one day, I was like, aliens have not gotten me yet. I'm going to just turn the lights off and stand here for a few seconds. And if the aliens want to get me, they can, but I'm going to get over this. And so it's like, I always think of that when I tell people, just sit here in the fear and recognize that nothing is happening to you.
Hiring a dating coach, hiring somebody to help you find love is sometimes looked down upon. And I'm just curious, there's this whole world of people who teach others how to get women or how to meet men. What's wrong about it and what's right about it? Like in your mind, because there's an entire industry here for people, helping people find love. So in your mind, where do you see where it's going right, and where do you see where sometimes it can actually hurt?
The first thing, so you mentioned that it can be sort of it's one of those things that not a lot of people are comfortable even approaching it, even if they feel like they need it. What I find is, so I've come full circle to the point where the majority of people that I help with dating advice are women. And I find that they're far more forthcoming about, hey, I could use some pointers on how to do a better job with this. Whereas I think perhaps just because of the societal norms that people have put on with like gender roles, men feel inferior if they need help with this thing. So there's that, where men are less likely to come for help in an environment that is healthy. So that you do see them going on these forums where they're taking advantage of women and these sorts of things. And I'm not about that unequivocally. It's not just a cheesy thing that I say in public, but then when you work with me, I'm like, all right, bro, I'm going to show you the real stuff. Yeah. No, that's not it. And that's part of the problem is people are sort of looking to this to do what I did at first and use it as a crutch for something that's missing in their life. So I'm always keen on making sure that the person is in a good place emotionally before I will even help them. There's a client I worked with just recently who we uncovered after an hour and a half session that while there was a lot of things that she could do to create the relationship she wanted, she wasn't there yet. She was still too fresh from her breakup. And I said, hey, look, let's just pause. You can come back whenever. I'm not going anywhere. But it doesn't make sense for me to force you into something you're not ready for. And a lot of coaches have this one-size-fits-all approach. I used to work for a company where I was one of many coaches. And they had this approach that, hey, all guys want to get women into bed. That's the goal. In fact, we're going to give you a bonus if that will happen. And I didn't like that, but not only because it just didn't seem right to me, but also it didn't make sense business-wise. I remember working with this client who he had come to Austin for a week to work with us for 10 hours a day. He didn't get to me until the last session. And my manager's like, hey man, he hasn't taken a woman home all week. You're our last hope for this to be a successful client. And so I say, all right, well, let me, I'll go meet with him and talk to him. As we're talking, I'm not really thinking about what they're telling me to do in management. I just want to get to know this guy. And so I say, hey man, you've been here for about a week now. How are you enjoying this experience? And he's like, this has been the most transformative experience of my life. First and foremost, I'm a devout Christian. I have no interest in having sex until I'm married. I wanted to come here to improve my social skills, learn to make friends with people, and I've been doing that. This has been great. And I said, wonderful, let's keep doing it. And that was no longer had anything to do with what we were working on. It was, what do you need? I'm going to find you where you are and try to help you get where you want to be. And what I've found is even the guys who are like, yeah, bro, I want to go hook up with a bunch of chicks. Most of them don't want that. They think they want that because that's what society tells them to, but inevitably, they're looking for something more emotionally gratifying, whether that's one guy, one girl, one girl, one girl, one guy, one, whatever, multiple people. Mm-hmm. In the end, they want something that's honest and is benefiting everyone involved.
We didn't get to talk about, I don't think we talked about professional wrestling, did we? We didn't tap into that at all. And no pun intended in terms of tapping in, but I do want to talk about that. Actually, because one of my big goals on the show is to get The Rock. That's my huge stretch goal, is to have The Rock on the show and interview him about his story. I'm sure you know a lot about The Rock, like such an inspiring guy. When did you first start getting into wrestling?
So I always watched wrestling with my papa growing up when I was very little. And I never thought I would do that. One, I don't know if you can tell, I'm not very big. Not a big dude. And so it didn't seem like a realistic thing, but I enjoyed it. And my father was always into martial arts. So he taught me a lot of those. And so I did like real martial arts. And I got into drama club. I was a drama geek. And I had a friend who found this gym that would let us rent out. Now I'm 15 years old, right? Would let us rent out their pro wrestling ring by the hour, and we could put on our little show in front of no one. Mm-hmm. And I was all about it. I was like, hell yeah, I'm gonna do that. So I brought a microphone and an amplifier, and I wrote up this promo that I was gonna give, and I did some martial arts and a bit of acrobatics. It was horrible. And I finish. I sit down to watch my buddies go, and this guy approaches me, Mad Dog Manson. He's, at the time at least, he was probably like 6'3", 400 pounds, bald head, big beard, scary guy. He's like,
Hey, kid, you're pretty funny.
I'm like, oh, thank you, sir.
You ever think about doing this?
Well, yeah, but I'm 125 pounds.
Yeah, well, you can eat a lot of food and lift weights. That doesn't stop nobody.
I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. So anyway, they end up signing me to a developmental deal that my father signed off on. So after high school, I would go to pro wrestling school 5 days a week for about 4 or 5 hours. And I learned the business. And I was fortunate that I was able to do training camps with guys who ended up making it to the WWE, guys like CM Punk and a guy who's known as Cassius Ohno now, and Nigel McGuinness and some others. But that sort of gave me opportunities that I wouldn't have. And really, it was my first exposure to coaching in the way that I do. And it's a cool job.
It's pretty amazing to have that in your background, that you were a professional wrestler. And I saw some of the videos, man. It looked legit. And it was, I feel like you can only do that when you're young, too. Because like there is a certain threshold the body can take as you get older.
When I get out of bed, my joints make a lot of noises. And my wife likes to say, when I grow up, I want to be a pro wrestler. Because she just imagines me saying that when I was young. And now I'm like, oh.
Yeah, it's not going to work anymore. When did you decide to stop wrestling? Was there a moment where it just wasn't working, or there was a better opportunity for you?
So I moved to Austin a little over 7 years ago. And I had been sort of at the peak of my wrestling at that point in the Cleveland was where I was based. And a few things happened all at once. There was a guy who was one of my mentors named JT Lightning, who at the time, he was suffering from late stage cancer. He's passed away now, but he had always been sort of a driving force. And I had made some supplement choices that weren't particularly healthy, that were injectables. And he started getting me to think about like, hey man, what's going to happen after this? What about your body? What about having a family? And I knew I was moving to Texas, and my promoters had some contacts within the WWE, and they said, hey man, you're about 200 pounds now, so you're starting to be big enough to go there. I could get you some tryouts. And I knew I was sort of at a kind of a crossroads. Like I can keep doing this, and maybe I'll luck out, and if I work hard enough, I can get to where, I don't know if that ever be as famous as The Rock, but I could make a good living at this. Or I could try to do something else. And at the time, I was doing the dating stuff as well. And I had some friends in the wrestling business who were saying, it's great up here. The WWE is awesome, but there's a lot of stuff you don't see that's not glamorous. The traveling, the getting beat up even worse than you do on the independent scene. And so I made a conscious decision when I moved to Austin to sort of reinvent myself. I never leave pro wrestling, as I'm sure whenever you interview Dwayne, and you will.
Oh, it's going to happen.
He'll tell you, like, once you're a pro wrestler, you're always a pro wrestler. It's a brotherhood.
Yeah.
But at that time, I decided, hey, it's time to stop punching people in the face for a living and doing something else.
What advice do you have for me in terms of getting The Rock on the podcast? Because I haven't made much progress. This is episode 25 of the Ground Up Show. So far, I met the only progress I've had is that I met somebody that has his assistants and business partners' contact information. So I got emails and I got a couple phone numbers, which is really exciting. And I haven't done anything with them yet because maybe I'm waiting. There's that balance between I feel like I should just do it, just reach out. But then at the same time, I'm like, I feel like I need to build a strong case for it because, of course, this is like if you're going to approach a girl, The Rock is like the hottest girl on the planet. And like, how do you approach this person? What kind of material do I bring? How do I sell him on coming on to this podcast that gets about, at this point, 1,000 downloads an episode, which is like, I'm really excited about that. I don't think The Rock it's going to incentivize The Rock to come on the show.
So first, if people take anything away from this episode, I want them to take away that The Rock is the prettiest girl in the world. The hottest girl in the world.
Yeah, fact.
I'm sure he'll appreciate that.
I think he will.
I have a few ideas. One, I think you're already doing the right thing by connecting with people who are connected to The Rock or Dwayne Johnson. That helps. I would say you don't have to wait until all of your ducks are in a row. It's sort of like the approach anxiety thing I was talking about where you're like, but what if I'm not big enough? All right. Do you think he'll remember you? Think of how many times he gets contacted for interviews that he can't do because he's just a busy dude. He probably doesn't remember all the times he's rejected people, which means you can try again.
That's a good
and
point.
Again. And before long, maybe he will remember you and be like, man, who's this Matt dude?
Yeah.
And I mean, the guy I'm sure has a place in LA. So there may be a time where it is convenient for him. And while there may not be the type of listeners, the type of audience that he's used to speaking in front of, you might find something that motivates him. Maybe it's a cause that he believes in, or it's a friend that you helped of his and he wants to give back. From what I get, I mean, I don't know the guy, but from what I gather, he seems very genuine. And I think that if you can touch that nerve, something that he really cares about that you share, and it works conveniently for his insane schedule, it probably happened. And don't stop. That's the key, because it might not happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
But it might happen in a year or two.
Just wait outside of his apartment.
Mm-hmm.
No, I feel like that's really good advice. I think that the thing that I'm getting out of this is that I need to put a lot of effort into it, and I really need to dive deep and think about what's going to connect and appeal to The Rock. And I think part of that is going to be making some kind of video that reaches out to him, as well as getting people listening to the Ground Up Show right now to tweet at The Rock to start to at least put it in his world. If I get everybody listening to the show right now to tweet at The Rock and say, hey, go on Matt D'Avella's The Ground Up Show, I feel like we can start to get there, even if it's like 5 tweets.
Worst case scenario, you could just get a lot of chloroform.
I could do that. It's going to have to be a lot because he's a big guy to bring down. And then you have to worry about, does The Rock have bodyguards? That's a good question. He probably does. I mean, and they've probably got guns because I feel like The Rock has enough personal power that he doesn't need to bring any extra muscle.
I feel like it depends when you catch him, because I see on his Instagram sometimes he takes pictures with people in his truck.
Yeah, by himself.
He's by himself.
Yeah. This sounds really creepy. It sounds like I'm going to do something where the FBI is going to start tracking me and making sure that I'm not a crazy person.
Stalking is the most sincere form of flattery.
I'm going to quote you on that when I go to trial. So I appreciate that. That's really good advice, and I'm going to take that to heart. And I'm going to do it before I think I'm ready for it. So I'm going to start mapping out the plan now. And then within the next couple weeks, I'm going to start rolling some stuff out. So thank you for that advice. From dating, coaching, where does your life go from there? You still do a bit of coaching as well. I mean, you do a lot of coaching.
Most of what I do now is career advice. What I find, and I don't necessarily talk about the two, when I'm working with someone on dating, they don't know me as a career coach. And typically the people I work with in the career coaching world, they don't know that I've worked as a dating coach. But they often recognize that those skill sets sort of go hand in hand, because you're selling yourself to people is what you're doing. Whether you're trying to get a job or investing, someone who invests in you, or a romantic relationship. It's all about getting them to see the value. And this is sort of what we were talking about with The Rock, is looking at what's going on in their mind. What would motivate them? What value could I offer them that would make them interested in doing this? And that's That's an important place to come from. You don't want to come from what I need. What do I need from them? Instead, it should be, what can I offer them? Mm-hmm. And whether or not I get something in return, just first offer something to them. And people are worried about scarcity for some reason. They think, man, if I offer too much value in this interaction, I could lose big because I'm investing, and maybe they'll just take what I've given and offer nothing back. But if you're offering things that are not physical, right? You're not spending a bunch of money. It's limitless. Mm-hmm. You can offer your experiences, your conversation, these sorts of things. And as far as why those sort of intersect, think about a first date and a first interview. They're kind of the same thing. A date is just an interview for a romantic partner to see, like, do they check off on all the lists? Do we get along? You get used to certain conversation threads. Anyone who's been on enough first dates or enough first interviews knows that there's only so many different types of conversations you can have. And if you're aware of that, you start to be able to sort of plan for those conversations. Now, this is where it gets sketchy because some people are worried about, but it's not serendipitous. But nothing is serendipitous once you're an adult. Let's be real. Even if you've never gone to a dating coach and if you've had great relationships and you knock every interview out of the park, if you're being honest with yourself, you know that there are things you have said in multiple interviews or in multiple dates. You have a background in comedy, right? Mm-hmm. When someone watches a comedian, stand-up comic, let's say it's an hour set. Now, if you're an audience member, it's one, hopefully funny, but two, it sounds like it's all off the top of their head. But you and I both know that's not the case.
Yeah, and I think the most interesting people to look at, Louis C.K. talks about it, where every single gesture, I forgot, what was I talking about? Everything is scripted. Everything is built into it. Obviously, there are moments where they might talk to somebody in the crowd, but even a lot of crowd work, once you hit a certain point, what do you do for a living? Boom. There are certain things that they can jump into and transition out of that. It's so much more of it is scripted than I think people realize.
Mm-hmm. And it's just as enjoyable.
Absolutely.
And it's not like people don't know that. They know at least to some degree it's scripted. It's like pro wrestling. Mm-hmm. It's still enjoyable. It doesn't matter that it's planned out.
I feel like a lot of this comes down to persuasion. In what ways can you persuade somebody into your way of thinking? Say if you're trying to get a job or if you're trying to get The Rock on your podcast, what elements of persuasion do you find most successful?
The important thing to remember is that persuasion, it doesn't mean that you are going to be able to implant your thoughts into someone who would not have otherwise agreed with you. You have to already have a thing that they want, that you then present in such a way that it is going to get the optimal reaction from them. And you try to minimize any negativity. So the way that you word things might be different. Give an example. This is from the career coaching world. If you are feeling like you don't have the right qualifications, well, one, don't talk about that. Mm-hmm. A lot of people feel the need to say, I know I'm not qualified, but don't put that thought in their head because they might not realize that you feel that way. They may see you and go, you're super qualified. So with The Rock, you might be like, I only have 1,000 listeners. He doesn't necessarily know that because he's probably not one of your 1,000 listeners.
I think that's really great advice. I think with The Rock, though, I think that's the appeal is that he's the people's champ, right? So it's like, what else would be nicer for his credibility than to go on a nobody's podcast? Like, I'm a nobody. I think that's actually going to be my advantage in this case, because if I had tons and tons of followers, then I think that's an incentive. If I'm somewhere in the middle, I don't think it helps much. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't think you're a nobody, though.
Yeah.
This goes back to something we were sort of talking about before we started recording, is at least once or twice a week. I'm not joking. People approach me, friends of mine, and I'll notice they're just in a great mood. I haven't seen them in a while. I'm like, hey, how are things going? You seem like you're doing really well. Yeah, I saw this documentary on Netflix called Minimalism. And I always smile. I know all about it. And that has changed so many people's lives, but there's something bigger to that story. The hustle that you and Joshua and Ryan had to go through to make that a reality. That's something that will resonate with a person like The Rock, and you have made an imprint. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't even be surprised if he's heard of your little documentary.
That would be so cool.
Yeah, so
that would be pretty great. Yeah, I appreciate that. I really do. And I still think I'm a nobody. But it's funny because it literally goes back to what you were saying, where don't start off an interview by saying, I know I'm not qualified. And that's exactly what I just did. But anyway, I don't want to screw up your train of thought there, because I think that was really, really good advice for people who are trying to get what they want, whether it be a job interview or land a date.
Think of musicians who are not famous yet, and they have a new song. And they start off with going, "This song is shit." Yeah. They don't know. It might be your favorite song. They shouldn't give you any idea of what they think of it, and just let you interpret it for yourself. And because everybody is going to have that insecurity, no matter how good they are, there's always a feeling of, am I really this good, or am I just getting lucky? I've had the feeling, and by now I've coached over 3,000 people. And still, to this day, I'm like, am I just faking it? I mean, I get that all these people were successful. They could have been without me. Did I help them along? I think I did. And I know, objectively, I did. But there's still that sneaking imposter syndrome where you're like, but there's all this other stuff I don't know yet, or I haven't done yet, that other people have done. So maybe I'm not good enough. And you have to, it's fine. That's going to be there. You shouldn't waste valuable energy trying to stop thinking that way. Just don't act that way.
Would you not call it faking it till you're making it? Or would you frame it in a different way? Is it technically faking it?
Oh, I don't want people to fake it. That's something that also happens in the dating world, where, especially with men, they are taught to demonstrate value and all these things that...
DHV,
homie. Get those IOIs.
Yeah.
And the problem there is they're often demonstrating an illusion, something they don't possess. What I would say is you should first figure out, what do I have to offer? And once you know what that is, and it may take time to figure it out, you may have to talk with your loved ones. But once you know what that is, you have to figure out, okay, now how do I package it? How do I present this to other people so that they will want to be a part of it? So you're not really faking it. You're figuring out what you have, and then you're presenting it. Now, you may question just how good it is, so maybe that part feels like you're faking it, but you have to make sure there is some kernel of value that you really have.
How does the Spartan Plan come about? I remember when you first came out with this, was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago? You started to initiate this challenge to people. It started out as the Spartan month, I think, or Spartan Plan for 1 month. It was the craziest shit ever. And I tried it and I failed within like a week. I'm not sure if that has much to do with Spartan Plan now, if it's a similar program that you run, but walk me through some of what that initial launch was.
Yeah. So I've had some weird experiences in my life. I did Hurricane Katrina relief 12 years ago. I had military training and all these things that had sort of instilled a sort of like a stoic but identifying with the Spartans mentality. And I always used February as a challenge month. I never talked about it to other people. It was just a challenge for me. And I had like a list of things I did. So one of the things that virtually everyone failed at was I don't use hot water in February, or even warm water, meaning ice showers in the dead of winter. And that was a part people just didn't want anything to do with.
Yeah, I didn't do that part. I was like, I'm going to just cross that one off from the beginning.
But there were other things like drink only water, eat only whole foods, exercise every single day, read for an hour every single day, sleep for at least 8 hours every single day. There's like a list of 10 things that I felt if you could do them, you at the end of the month would be a better person for it. And then you could decide what you wanted to keep. And so it was admittedly maybe a little too difficult for mass appeal. So I'm going to probably draw it back a little bit in February. But Spartan Plan, the program I'm now building, is still a spinoff of that. It's this idea of what are these few things you could do? So not 10 anymore, but a few things you can do consistently and build into a habit that will have a maximum impact on your life. There's a lot of different diet advice out there, fitness advice, and I'm not saying it's bad, but I believe that if you want 80% of the results, there's only a few things you need to do. You need to move. There could be a lot of different ways you like to do that, but most of it comes from what you eat. Don't drink your calories. So, I mean, I drink coffee, but I drink black coffee or plain tea. Eat real food.
So don't drink your calories. Would you say no smoothies, or is that an exception to the rule?
I mean, there are people who do smoothies. I once in a blue moon do. I just like to eat the fruit though, because then I feel more full.
Yeah. So what were some of these other principles that you're talking about?
Those are some of the big ones. Sleep.
Yeah.
It is such an overlooked thing. People say like, "Oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead." Well, you'll be dead a lot sooner, and even if you're not, you're going to feel less than optimal if you're not sleeping properly.
Dude, I hate it when people say that. That was like when I first started up, I had some mentors early on that would repeat that. Like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And it was, especially in like the music video world, it was very much you work throughout the entire night. You put in 18, 20-hour days. And I'd only done a couple of those, but I'm like looking at some of these people that are pretty old and continuing to do this over a long period of time. And I'm like, man, that cannot be sustainable.
Well, and even if they live to be 90, I just wonder what the quality of life is. For me, if I was on a sleep debt with this Hurricane Harvey business I live in Texas, and I had to stay up for 36 hours straight. So I made up for that by sleeping for about 15 hours straight. It was fucking incredible. And I just thought to myself, why would I not give myself that when that was clearly what my body needed? So this happens a lot in the startup world when people are trying to be real scrappy and hustle. And I admire the hustle. People like Gary Vaynerchuk, they're all about like, just work long hours, just put in more work than anybody else. I'm all about working harder and smarter, but there should be a limit. Like you got to take care of yourself as a human and have to remember, why the hell am I even doing this? You know, yes, the work can be a part of your passion, and maybe that's your main passion, but you can only enjoy it so well if you're not rested, if you're not properly fueled, and you won't be as good if you're not properly fueled.
I think it wears on your patience too. And if you are not getting enough sleep, you're more likely to break out into fights with the people that are closest to you. I think that's something that may be overlooked. And when you're punishing yourself, your body, and you're just working crazy long hours, like you said, there are times for that. There are times when you have a book launch or a film that you're creating and you have a deadline you're running up against. And I think in a lot of ways, I'm totally okay with that. And I think I get a sense of excitement from that, and like working long hours when I really have to, and pulling all-nighters. Like, I will do that when I have to do it. I do it less and less the older I get. I think I had it a little bit more when I was in my early 20s. I could do that a little bit better. But yeah, I think that you have to kind of, you have to balance that. And like you said, why are you doing this? And is it sustainable over the long run? And I would say for the most part, it's probably not. I've heard, I was just having a conversation with my family this week about sleep and how much sleep is the right amount to get. And obviously it's very different for everybody. I find that personally, like 7 hours of sleep is like right in my wheelhouse, where if I get any more, if I get 8+ hours of sleep, I tend to be overtired. I wake up more groggy than I would otherwise. Where do you fit in that realm? And what have you heard about sleep in terms of well-being?
In the studying that I've done, I mean, it varies. There are people who don't need as much, and that may not just be, it may vary throughout your lifetime. Right? You might need way more when you're in your teenage years, that sort of thing, because you're growing and developing. For me personally, usually 8 hours, but if I'm on a big debt of sleep, I might sleep way longer. Or last night, for example, I slept probably 6 hours. Mm-hmm. The idea, though, is I make space for the sleep, and I prepare for the sleep, so I'm not looking at my phone, this sort of thing. I'll try to just read a book and calm down. And if I happen to just be kind of laying in bed, I might get up and walk the dog or do something that's still relaxing. But I make sure that there is space for the sleep, and hopefully it happens. But if it doesn't, I'll probably still be fine.
Tell me a little bit about the current routines that you've been in terms of your morning routine. I know we were just talking about this beforehand. You've started to make some interesting changes.
Yes. I wake up now at 5:30 in the morning with my wife, and we go to the gym. We don't typically do anything very intense in our early morning workouts. We save that for the weekends. But we'll just pop in here, pro wrestling.
Yeah.
We'll go to the gym, do like a little bit of low intensity cardio, and from there we'll come home, walk the dog. I don't have to go anywhere to work. I'm fortunate. So I have hours when I get home to just relax, read the newspaper, read a book. And I don't typically eat until afternoon. And it's not a hard rule, but I just typically don't get hungry. I'm on I think I told you I do sort of a ketogenic type diet where higher fat, very little carbohydrates. And that ends up leaving me with a lot of energy that I don't have to eat that often. And so I try to kind of go with what my body wants to do. And, as it gets dark, I tend to get tired. And so I'll settle down. I don't usually work at that point. But if I do need to, the lights that we have in the house is very cheesy, but we found these, I think it's called Lighting Science. I'll give them a plug here. Mm-hmm. They should totally sponsor your show.
That would be great.
But they have...
And then the only lights that I use on the show should be... They're really orange lights, warm lights.
Yeah, they're very warm lights. They don't have the blue light, which can help... the blue light restricts the melatonin production in your brain, which makes it harder to fall asleep. So we like to use those at night. And, it's hokey and maybe it's only a negligible difference, but sometimes the placebo effect is important too.
I guess you could say I'm light sensitive in terms of I'm very aware of the lighting, especially as I'm getting ready for bed. I'll start to slowly turn down the lights over the span of 3 to 4 hours. Natalie, she doesn't get it, and then she'll just walk in the kitchen, flip the light on, and then wake me up. And it's she doesn't quite understand, and we're very different in that regard, but we work through it. But I feel like that's important, at least for me. And that might be a placebo effect. Maybe I don't really understand. Maybe I'm kind of tricking myself to think that it's important.
Possibly, but if it is to you, then it is. I luck out. My wife, Kate, she kind of goes along with it and thinks, oh, this is fun. Let's try this out. She's so used to me experimenting on things by now that once in a while she's like, yeah, I'll do that one. And then other times she's like, no, you're crazy.
This is you. Okay, cool. Because I thought maybe I was the only one. It's great that she experiments with you. Natalie, I'll be like, hey, so I was thinking about getting rid of the TV. Because, I want to start listening to more podcasts. And, we can always get it back. And it was just like, no, you're not getting rid of the TV. I need to watch My Bachelor. And I'm like, all right, okay, we'll keep. Actually, but then when she said that, it made me want to get rid of it even more. And then it becomes a thing. And then now she knows better that if I say something crazy like, hey, I think I want to get a gun. And then she's like, and I actually know you're into shooting. And I think it's probably, I've gotten into Sam Harris a lot and Joe Rogan. And a lot of them talk about gun ownership, Jocko Willink. And I'm like, oh man, I had a crazy dream last night where somebody broke in and tried to kill us. And I was like, I need a gun. And she now knows not to just completely say, you're not getting a gun. She's like, okay, well, we'll see about that. And then I probably just let it go. Tell me about the gun stuff, because that's it seems really fun and really, really cool. Have you always been into guns, or was this just a new hobby that you started to pick up? And archery as well.
Archery, yeah, bow hunting. I had been a vegan for 10 years. And I grew up around guns. My dad owns several guns. So I've always had a certain knowledge of them. And the time I spent in the Army, I had experience with rifles. I hadn't done much with them for over a decade. But I was sort of considering not being a vegan anymore. And I was trying to find the best way to go about doing that. Because I still believe in a lot of the philosophy behind why I was a vegan. The environment, and I care about animal welfare. So I thought, well, what can I do? I can get organic, free-range meat, which I do, but I also thought, well, a way to get more in touch with nature and a way to feel, at least to some degree, like I've earned what I'm eating is to try my best to go out and get it myself. And that kind of got spurred on by the Joe Rogan podcast and Cameron Hanes, who I'm a huge fanboy of. I saw that he got into bow hunting and he was an athlete about it. And I was looking for sort of this thing to fill the athletic void of pro wrestling. And so my gateway drug was my compound bow. And I became obsessed. Just every Saturday, if you go to my Instagram, it's nothing but me shooting my bow or shooting guns. The guns came later for similar reasons. There was a break-in in one of my neighbor's houses not too long ago. And maybe a year before that, there was an active shooter in the building where my wife works.
Wow.
And I just thought, yeah, obviously those things are rare. Thankfully, we live in safe times, but they're not 0% chance of happening. And when they do happen, the police, they're going to do their best they can to keep you safe, but they can't be there instantly.
They're not going to be there if somebody breaks through a window and starts,
Not at all.
looking for you.
And statistically speaking, if you're home during the break-in, they're going to try to kill you. Mm-hmm. I ended up getting my license to carry in Texas. I got a small collection of guns. But I went a step further, and like Sam Harris talks about, I've taken tactical classes to brush up on my skill set. So I'm an expert with the weapons that I have. And the training that I go through, they'll tell you, the guy is an ex-police officer, and he says, look, we're going to do our best to keep you safe, but you need to be the first person to do that. Honestly, most of what we do is to come try to figure out what happened afterwards, because these things, they don't take very long. Not to get political on your show, but we're in a time where this country is very divided. And I tend to, in most cases, lean left. There are certain things. I have guns, so I'm not always left-leaning.
I love it when liberals get guns. I just hate the how people fit into the identity politics and everything's always in one boat. And it's just nice to see that people think for themselves.
I confound people because I voted for Hillary Clinton, and I'm also an NRA member.
There you go.
But I think that this has been valuable because since we're so divided, a lot of times people aren't talking to the other side that often. And getting involved in hunting and guns has brought me in touch with these people who see the world very differently from me. But I like them. I see them and I go, oh, well, that's a cool person. But they voted for someone I don't agree with. So maybe I can still respect them and understand that there's ideas like, oh, everyone who voted for that other person is this or that. And that, what I've found is that's not true. For example, I know people who voted for Donald Trump who are definitely not racist, or at least they're black people who don't like black people then, because I know black people who voted for Donald Trump.
Sure.
And I know other people who aren't black who voted for him, and I'm part black, and they fucking love me. So it's not as cut and dry as what people want to believe. It's much easier to say they're bad, we're good, instead of this is complicated and we should talk to each other.
It's funny how little politics matter when you're not talking about politics. You know what? We might as well, at this point, get into the one and only segment of the podcast. It's called Quick Questions.
Okay.
So quick questions, not necessarily quick answers. It's really up to you.
I'll try.
You do you, and then I'll do me. The easy part is in my world. But I got some questions prepared for you. Question number 1. What's easier said than done?
Taking risks. People say just go do it. It's a Nike slogan. Just do it. Well, that's easy to say, but it's harder to do it.
What advice would you give to somebody who needs to just do it?
Create a consequence. What I like to recommend is send money in an envelope to a friend, but address it to an organization you hate vehemently with a deadline, and set a SMART goal, something that's actionable, that you can measure it, but it has a timetable, and it has to be within your reach. You can't say like, oh, I'm going to get this job. It would be like, I'm going to apply to this many jobs, something that is completely within your control. And that will usually create a consequence to your inaction that is greater than your perceived consequences to action.
How do you deal with criticism?
I try to work on that and get better. I'm human though. So there may be times where someone critiques something that I do. I'm sure that in this podcast, I must have said the word so like 500 times.
Yo, I say so all the time as well.
And I'm becoming conscious of it because one of my students made me conscious of it. They were like, every time you switch ideas, you say so, and now I hear it. And every time I'm just like, God damn it. But I recognize that the only way I'll get better is by getting criticized, because I'm not going to know everything that I don't know. I need someone outside of me to point out what I'm doing wrong. Sometimes. There are other times where I know, but there's like a ceiling that you get to where you need someone who has more experience. Now, that said, on the flip side, sometimes I'll get criticism from someone who I feel is unqualified to give me advice. And my response is sort of, okay, cool. I don't care. Or if they keep pushing it, I'm like, fuck off.
Yeah.
Right. You have to know what's important to you, and sort of, this goes for criticism. This goes for like things you spend your time on. Like recently I got rid of all my novels I owned because I realized, I don't like reading novels. And people are like, Crew, you should read novels. They're good for you. I believe that may be true, but I don't like them. I like watching movies. That's how I'll get my narratives. And I read nonfiction. So, that's great for you, but fuck off. I don't want to do that.
But fuck off. That's really good advice. Yeah, you have to be able to distinguish where you're getting the criticism from. Is it a YouTube comment or is it your best friend? And knowing the difference.
And does your best friend know what the fuck they're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. And my best friends don't. You're a big podcast fan. What are like your favorite podcasts that you'd recommend?
The Joe Rogan Experience I love, the Tim Ferriss Show, everybody knows about these. Something that I've gotten into more recently is a Vox podcast, The Weeds, which it just gets real deep into different political concepts, which helps me learn more, at least about some small part of this grand thing that's going on in the world. So The Weeds, Vox in general, tends to simplify things that are really complicated for me to understand. I would say that. I also really like The School of Greatness, Lewis Howes. It's a lot of personal development stuff, which...
It's kind of just like this podcast, but just like more famous people, right? Yeah. Like he kind of talks about people's stories and sees where they came from.
Which to me is sort of like what you get from reading books. You're getting a condensed version of someone's life experiences that you can then learn from. When people, at least when I was young, I was shit at learning from other people's mistakes. But now I really try to focus on what mistakes did this person already make that I can learn from, because they're being so generous as to share it with me. So I owe it to them to try not to make those same mistakes.
Yeah, you don't have to make all the mistakes that your predecessors made or your mentors made. That's why you have mentors, is to make sure you don't have to go through the same mistakes and screw ups that they went through. Similar question. What source do you go to when you're feeling doubt? So is there a book that you go back to, a podcast episode you go back to, or a friend?
There are a lot of those things. My wife is an immense force in my life. She's definitely been sort of someone who pushed me with Hack Reactor, my job now. There was a lot of doubt. I was scared. I was comfortable in what I was doing. There was no financial imperative. I didn't have to switch what I was doing. But she knew that this was the right next step for me, and she just pushed me into doing it. She was like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? She started sounding like me when I coach people. And I was like, well, I don't know. I could fail at this. She was like, great, okay. And then what? Oh, I won't have a job. And she's like, do you think you could find another job? I was like, well, yeah. She's like, then who cares? And so she's a big part. As far as a book, I highly recommend, maybe this is a little too esoteric, but have you ever heard of Alan Watts?
Yeah.
So he wrote a book called The Book on the taboo of, I don't know the subtitle, The Book. Mm-hmm. That's kind of sad. I've read it like 5 times and I don't know the subtitle. It's like the truth of who you are.
Yeah.
But it helps me sort of, the way I look at the world, maybe this is because of the exposure to Zen Buddhism, but I look at it like there's this crazy shapeless journey that we're all on, and we're trying to make sense of it. So our brains try to overlay a grid on top of reality to figure it out, to measure it. Now, that's not reality, but we convince ourselves that it is. And when our grid doesn't give us the result we expect, then we feel this uncertainty and doubt, and we freak the fuck out. But it's valuable, at least for me, to occasionally remind myself, hey crew, you don't have this figured out. This is just a grid you laid over reality to try to make sense of it. It usually works, but it is not reality in and of itself.
One last thing before we wrap up this episode, how should people connect with you online? Where do they go?
So they can email me, crew@spartanplan.com. That's my website, spartanplan.com. As far as social media, the only ones I use would be Facebook, which is just /crew Spence. Instagram is @crew Spence, and LinkedIn is /crew Spence. Pretty easy to remember.
Sweet, brother. Thanks for making it work today.
Thank you for having me, man.
Appreciate it. That's it. That's a wrap. Thanks for listening to The Ground Up Show. If you like this podcast, there's something you can do right now to help. Head on over to iTunes and leave a quick review. I print out every single one and I put them up on my mood board above my bed. Okay, that's not true, but I still notice and appreciate every one. For more on The Ground Up Show, including behind the scenes videos, check out groundupshow.com. Thanks for listening.